I've got, as promised, I have Larry back. I have Larry back because yesterday we talked an awful lot about the implications of the entire Elon Musk drive on Friday night, which may be a historic drive, I think, Larry. But we didn't ever get around to talking about Powell. So now we need to talk about Powell and what that means, what's going to happen going forward. Larry, thank you so much for coming back on.
Yeah, it's fun, Randy. Us, common or garden business creatures critiquing the masters of economics, and we have a lived experience in this chaos that they create for us.
That's right.
So I think we have every right to be critical and to critique it, don't you?
I absolutely do. And I think there's also, as a kind of your implication in there, that the fact that both of us have had, well, I know between us 100 years of experience on the ground, running businesses in all parts of the world, importing, exporting, manufacturing, distribution, services, et cetera, I think maybe.
And software development.
I think that we have not just the right, they should probably be calling us. So if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe, hit notify, hit like. Anyway, Larry, okay, here's the deal. Powell comes on Friday. The market for the first 15 minutes just sits there. Doesn't go. No, the first 15 minutes it did.
The first 15 minutes it was kind of what?
What? Okay. Oh, that seemed okay. I don't see anything wrong there. And then a couple of pundit guys on CNBC are like, oh yeah, this was hawkish. And the market goes, NVIDIA leading the way. Tesla, meanwhile, stays up the whole day. And then eventually, by the end of the day, the market is completely corrected. Well, not completely, but it had come way back up because I think people looked at, they actually did their own homework, looked at the Powell speech and went, oh no, he was actually a little bullish on the economy, which I thought was an important part of it. And I loved his tutorial on PCE. Anyway, what did you think about it? I should have let you go first. What did you think about the Powell talk?
Well, I gave a little talk to a group yesterday, and my brief was to summarize what Powell said.
Oh, okay.
So I can share that with you. It's not worth going through the whole thing, but I can quickly zip through the slides that really reprise what Powell said. And I think it bears a lot of critical thought because it really, every year they kind of brief economists on what their thinking is. And at this conference in Jackson Hole, nice to be able to afford, Jackson Hole rates and have a conference there, particularly if the Federal Reserve is sponsoring it. And why shouldn't they? They have trillions of our money, so.
Yeah, right. Somebody did a big article about how Jackson Hole is not America.
I mean, it used to be the time that civil servants were underpaid and overworked. And now they're underworked and overpaid.
Larry, I have said over and over and over again, when I was in school, which of course was before time began, but when I was going through school, it was assumed that if you became an entrepreneur or a lawyer or a doctor or, a CPA or whatever, that was the road to making substantial money. Now it's becoming a fire chief or a police chief or, and ending up with pensions and the hundreds of thousands of dollars in addition to your...
Or an administrator in a college.
Oh, an administrator in a college. Absolutely. Yes.
Because there are more administrators now in many colleges than there are educational staff, and they're much higher paid.
Yes, I know. Oh, don't get us started. Okay, let's go back to Powell. Did you want to share your slides?
Sure. If you allow me to share my screen.
I have done that. Yes. That's
Let me go ahead and talk about Randy.
Yeah, yes, we can see it. Absolutely.
Okay, great. So when we talk about what is great. So when we talk about this speech, we must understand that this is the chairman of the Federal Reserve kind of signaling what the view of the Federal Reserve is. And he's speaking to a bunch of economists at Jackson Hole in this annual conference they hold. And this is just a summary. I'm going to shoot through the summary very quickly, and then we'll talk about the implications, or we'll talk about, feel free to interrupt me and talk about the implications as we move along.
Okay.
So basically, he said that it's the Fed's job to bring down inflation to a 2% goal. And he's restating this goal, which is quite important because there's been conversation among some economists that maybe 3% is the better goal.
Or even 2.5.
Yeah, and it's an open conversation, but I think this has been visited several times over the last 2 decades, 3 decades, not as explicitly as it has been in the recent weeks. But typically this conversation always comes up during a tightening period, not often when it's giving away money. He's tightened.
Larry, back in 1970, I think it was, back in 1970, the debate topic for the university level debate, competition nationally was, should we cap inflation or try to cap inflation at 3%?
Yeah.
That's the debate topic. Yeah.
Yeah. And the open question is, why not 5%?
Right.
And why not 1%? What is the magic of 2%? And I think it was Friedman actually that did the work that said, we want a touch of inflation, which is a good thing because deflation is always bad. We want a touch of inflation, but not too much of inflation. And the settlement at 2% took some time. So he says, although inflation has moved down from its peak, a welcome development, it remains too high. And we'll see that, from the Fed's perspective, it's at 3.2%. Whether it is or not is an open question. We'll talk about that. But this is the key to the speech. We are prepared to raise rates further if appropriate, to hold policy at a restrictive level until we are confident that we are moving sustainably down. That implies that he's moving down below 2% in my head, because if we actually look at the numbers, the rate of decline is approaching, it sees us approaching that 2%. So this is actually more aggressive talk than I would have thought appropriate at the time. But anyway, let's see how he stages it. And he breaks his speech into 3 sections. And the first section is talking about the decline thus far. And he shows this graph that shows headline inflation, the 12% month change, and how it's come down. This is where he's aiming for, down here.
Right.
This is where we are. And in fact, there's a little uptick, so in the US inflation rate. The question is how much momentum is there to the downside? And is that momentum going to reach us to this point? The problem economists always have is if this momentum is too fast and overshoots, this is a very big danger area. If you get below, below 0.5% and you're still moving down, you're in a very serious danger area. And I don't think the audience needs explanation of why deflation is so dangerous. Anybody who has studied the Great Depression and recessions in many countries will understand why this is so dangerous. In simple terms, deflation is much more serious than inflation.
Yes.
So Core inflation, he starts with core inflation, the three components of inflation, and he starts with core inflation. And he says the lower monthly readings for core inflation June, July were welcome, but it's only just the beginning, and it takes a lot more to build confidence, and it shows, how the core inflation is moving down. And so if you look at the 3-month mark, it's dramatically lower than the 6-month mark, which is lower still than the 12-month mark. This is always a good sign when the shorter term marks are better than the longer term marks, because it shows you what direction we're moving in. And then he talks about core goods inflation, which have fallen sharply for durable goods. The motor vehicle sector he provides as an example that vehicle inflation declined sharply because of combined effects of these supply and demand factors. I think we're going to see deflation in car prices. We're certainly seeing it in Tesla prices.
Right.
But I think we're going to see it in other prices, because I think dealer lots have become quite full. And at that point, the dealer discounts, which have been absent for a while, are going to start mounting quite heavily. And similar dynamics, he says, are playing out for core inflation. If you look at the goods excluding energy and food, it's pretty steep and is well below that 2% mark already.
Right.
And that's an important indicator.
Now, he did put a lot of emphasis on that other services category.
Yeah, I'm getting there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. After housing, we get to non-housing services. So measuring housing, again, this is interesting that it shows the Zillow and CoreLogic numbers as well, because, the solid line, which has always been the line they've used up to now, is such a lagging indicator. But he says measuring housing services inflation lagged these changes, as is typical, but has recently begun to fall. No, it's fallen quite dramatically.
Yeah, no kidding.
Going forward, if market, I see this as the beginning of the Fed, moving to a more modern marker, and they have to slowly transition because they've got these huge, backlog of records that they have to keep. Anyway, so going forward, if market rent growth settles near pre-pandemic levels, housing services inflation should decline towards pre-pandemic level. Well, we're already at that 2% mark, so quite a few markers already at the 2% mark. And then non-housing services, this accounts for over half of the core PCE index. So that's pretty critical. I mean, we're talking about, half of this critical index that, is the focus. And it moved sideways since liftoff. Inflation measured over the past 3 and 6 months has declined, however, which is encouraging. So again, the shorter term markers are more, you are the indicator of the direction, and they're very, very good. And given the size of the sector, some further progress here will be essential to restoring price stability. In other words, he's not buying it yet. He needs more to see it. And over time, restrictive monetary policy will help bring aggregate supply and demand back into better balance. I think he's overshooting myself.
Yes, and a big piece of this is what do you call it? Accommodations, airline tickets, things that are very seasonal. And while I think that there will still be a lot of people traveling in the fall and winter, not nearly as many as are traveling during the summer, and that's definitely going to bring down lodging and airfares. Well,
they do adjust these figures seasonally, but to your point, we have seen the relative price of air tickets begin to drop quite precipitously.
Yes, after being very high.
Very, very high, and they're dropping precipitously as we return to normal. Look, so much of this is pandemic related, and Kathy Wall has pointed out. Kathy Wood. Yeah, I had an accountant who was a financial controller for a while, who was Kathy Wall. But Kathy Wood, has pointed out the nature of this kind of this sine wave that's slowly shrinking, the impact from the pandemic, where we keep overshooting oversupplied to undersupplied, and so on. So I would have been happier if he would recognize the nature of of this beast. But given that they, together with the government, with the executive branch, have been responsible for much of that, I guess they don't want to speak about it in too much detail.
I see.
So now he goes to the question of the outlook. In general, he says, although further unwinding of pandemic-related distortions should continue to put somewhat downward pressure on inflation, restrictive monetary policy will likely play an increasingly important role. This is a really good statement, because what he's saying is that he recognizes that the policy is beginning to bite. And then he says getting inflation sustainably back to 2%, not just simply get to 2%, but sustainably back to 2%. Now, I don't know. I've lived through 6 of these governors, maybe 7. I've lived through all these governors, and I've never, ever seen one of them achieve a, quote, soft landing.
You just don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He says that it's expected to require a period of below-trend economic growth as well as some softening in the labor market conditions. Well, having pumped this dinghy up beyond its capacity, they now want to actually drop it below its capacity.
Well, one of the other presidents, I forget which one, I think Chicago Fed, but I can't remember for sure, spoke on Thursday. And he said he was talking about now an unemployment rate of 4.3%. That is way below what they were talking about earlier, which was one of the things that gave me, in addition to some of his comments on the strength of the economy now, that made me feel like it was in some ways bullish about the economy.
Yeah, there's a lot more participation in the labor markets now, and I think I have some comments on that later on. That was worrying the heck out of me. This low participation, because the level of participation really is it's the safety valve for the economy.
Yeah,
I mean, it's more important actually, in my view, than some of these monetary issues. Anyway. Price issues, I should say, rather than monetary. So the outlook for economic growth, tightening typically contributes, this is his gobbledygook, tightening typically contributes to slowing of growth of economic activity. Really? And there's evidence of that in the cycle. Growth in industrial production has slowed, and amounts spent on residential investment has declined in each of the past quarters. What he doesn't say here is that it's declined considerably, dramatically.
Yes.
And this is what concerns me.
Well, that's what destroyed the market midweek.
Yeah.
It was that the final nail in the coffin of the evidence that manufacturing is slowing down badly. Manufacturing production. Even though there's been a few bright spots, which I brought up on one of my programs the other day, that in terms of the housing and the business construction market, there is some evidence now that that's ticking up in the right direction. But overall, it's historic how low the the Purchasing Managers Index is for manufacturing. It's like multiple quarters in a row or months in a row now.
Yeah, there's no doubt that this pig is going to move through the snake, and that's actually a bad picture, because it's not so much that the snake is engorged on the pig; it's that the snake hasn't eaten for a while, and really needs a pig, if you will. But he says, and this is classic Powell, economy may not be cooling as expected. GDP growth has come above expectations. Recent readings on consumer spending has been especially robust. The housing section is showing signs of picking up. So, for him, everything's rosy. It's too rosy. Additional evidence of persistently above trend growth could warrant further tightening of monetary policy. I mean, really?
Yeah, I'm more worried, as you know, Larry. My concern is not about the interest rates, although they're important. My concern is always about whether businesses and people can borrow, and whether they can borrow at rates that they can sustain. It's one thing for a business to be able to go and get a loan. There's almost always some hard money out there somewhere that a business can borrow, but it's going to be at rates that they cannot keep their business alive at. So the issue.
Yeah, but the structure of our banking industry now is such that I'm not sure that there is a place for them to go and borrow.
Well, I'm talking about there's hard money guys out there. I mean, maybe you never.
Oh, yeah. But even that gray market, we used to call it a gray market. Even that gray market is, they're not opening their hands.
I see.
And so, to your point, there's always a clearing price, and that clearing price may be very, very high right now.
Yeah.
And it may well be, put a lot of people out of business.
Right.
I just, I think we need a far more efficient way of gathering economic data that is real.
And Larry, I keep coming back to this, and maybe I'm just confused. I mean, I've been studying economics for 50 years, 60 years maybe, but where I get confused is at this point in the process, the high interest rates are keeping people from building more houses. The high interest rates are keeping people from moving out of their homes, therefore not putting any homes on the market, allowing the price of homes to come down by creating supply. The cost of money, the high interest rates are keeping companies from opening more businesses and therefore providing more products and services. So it seems to me that the restrictive pricing, the restrictive interest rates right now are actually potentially causing a big piece of the inflation. Not to mention that nominally it creates inflation because you have to pass through the interest rates to the customer. So you have nominal increase, plus you have all these other impacts that maybe wouldn't happen if you had runaway inflation, that you would really need to have this kind of a restrictive situation. But now that you're this close and you know what the reasons are, it almost seems like bringing down the interest rates would help the process.
That's an interesting perspective. And, the economists will tell you that, economics is, it's this crazy science. Well, they call it a science. It's not a science at all. It's,
it's an art.
It's an art. And so far, none of the artists have ever painted a good picture. I mean, every governor has had his or her, comeuppance. But this guy, when he was loose, he was too loose. When he was tight, he was too tight. It just seems that there wasn't ever this happy median. Anyway, so he talks about, he's warning us, if you really grow too quickly, I'll get you back into line. And then he has these outlooks that show to me, when I look at industrial production, or if I look at private residential investment, this doesn't look inflationary to me at all. This looks like, hey, we're actually in decline.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what the hell is he talking about tightening further for?
Yeah.
Then he talks about the labor market. He talks about the labor supply is improved. This is the one really good thing that I saw out of the numbers that he presents. Stronger participation among workers aged 25 to 54 and an increase in immigration back towards pre-pandemic levels. That's what I've been looking for. I believe immigration is our save. It's the way US has always grown. It is the secret behind US success. And clamping down on immigration is a disastrous approach to the world. I'd rather have a strong immigration during a pandemic. Just make sure that the people coming in are well.
Yes.
But just keep it going. This is the flywheel. This is actually the power behind the flywheel. It's beyond the flywheel. This is what powers the flywheel.
And it'll be more critical going forward, as you and I have talked about, because of the fact that these other countries are not even replacing themselves in population and are disinclined for immigration, or nobody wants to go there anyway. That's the benefit of the United States. People want to come here, and we are generally inclined towards immigration. I agree with you 100%. I was actually thinking the other day, Larry, another wild idea, and nobody will pay any attention to me anyway. But maybe this is the way to finally get a bill through Congress with regard to the southern border, would be to say, let's forget about all the implications in terms of what's happened over the last 20 years, and let's just look at the economy. Let's just look at the fact of demographics. We're not going to send these people back, so let's give them citizenship. A road. Now I'm a total conservative here. This is a conservative talking. I've always said this. I've said this for 20 years. Give them a roadmap. Give them an opportunity to become citizen. Provide some kind of a way, and then open the border in the South in a way that processes people really fast. But not wide open, not just anybody that wants to come across, but process them fast.
Look, this particular approach cost George Bush his support. This and Social Security, the attempt to reform Social Security,
which needs to be done as well.
So both of those were really excellent policy, ideas of the Bush administration, and both got shot down very badly. And the circumstances, or the atmosphere today, is far worse than it was in the time of George Bush.
Right.
So I don't, and Biden has kind of just opted out of the whole immigration question. Just, forget about it. In the meantime, we're not winning the war of attracting, the intelligentsia of the world. We were winning that. We won that war post Second World War. We won that battle for the minds, the best minds in the world, and now we've kind of given up on it.
Yeah, it's actually still happening, Larry. I don't know about in your part of the country, but I haven't been to a medical doctor or any practitioner in the medical field in the last 5 years that hasn't been either Pakistani, Indian, Taiwanese, Filipino. The top. These people are outstanding, and they're.
But Randy, that was 5, 6, 10 years ago.
I see.
Those people came in, and now they're in the mainstream. Today, it's not happening.
I see. Okay.
Now, he does talk about it returning. He says, and an increase in immigration back towards pre-pandemic levels. My point is that it was a catastrophe not allowing these people during the pandemic. Right. We can't afford it.
Right.
And this is really contributing towards inflation. But he says participation rate of women in their prime working years is reaching all-time high. This is very important. And demand for labor has moderated as well. So you get, this increasing number of people entering the supply side, and you get this reduction in demand. And so, you're looking at a balance occurring. You see that the work week is down, the hours per person is down, and the aggregate hours are down. So in general, payroll growth has slowed significantly, average work week has declined, gradual normalization in labor conditions. Well, this is not inflation.
Right.
This is not inflation at all. In fact, if you allow this to go on any longer, we'll have deflation.
Right.
So, Mr. Powell, if you're listening, mend your ways.
If any of you know him, send along a copy of this video.
Well, I'm sure he listens to us, right?
Of course he does.
But he says, he now gives a warning. You better stop employing people. Evidence that tightness in the labor market is no longer easing could also call for a monetary policy response. If you're not hurting enough, just fire a few people. I may ease up a little bit. I mean, come on.
Once again, he's showing the stats, which are great, but we can also take a look at what's really going on out there. We know for a fact that the tech companies are laying off. Now, they're not laying off in mass, tens of thousands at a time, although a couple of them have, but they're laying off now in anticipation of GPT being used. They're laying off because they're hiring more strategically is what's happening. And they're firing more strategically because they can now. They're not sitting there worried that they won't be able to find enough labor next month. This allows them to be way more strategic.
It's not as pleasant as you make out, Randy.
Okay. Okay.
There have been mass layoffs by almost all the companies. And the point is the startups are not hiring anymore, period. And startups are not starting up anymore, period. Right. So what was, a vicious circle in one direction has turned into a vicious circle in another direction. Don't underestimate how much pain there is in that field.
Yeah. Normally, it's a very smart idea to do a startup in a slow economy because your competition is not prepared and they're not.
That's right.
But in this particular situation, the regional banks specifically said last week, if it comes down between lending to an existing customer and lending to a startup, we're gonna lend to the existing customer, even having the same balance sheet, the same credit score, everything else. Right now, because our available cash is so low, we're always going to give it to the customer that's been with us.
Look, I'm in the venture industry, and,
yes.
I've been involved in exits, fairly significant exits in good times and in bad times.
Yeah.
So, the difference between good time and bad time in the software industry is so dramatic, I can't even begin to describe it. Now, today, in order to get funded, you have to put the letters AI at the end of whatever you're doing.
Right, exactly.
And you have to somehow pretend that what is powering you is AI. And AI can mean so many things that it's quite meaningless. But, the venture funds are not as stupid as they once were. I mean, I'm kidding, really. They never were that stupid. But even private money is somewhat aware of, just how much bull there is around this .ai thing.
Right.
There are very few AI initiatives that are unique and that are defensible. Because if you're simply using AI to do some particular support work of a particular function, somebody else can do the same thing.
I got it. Yep. Okay. Yeah. So next slide.
Yeah. So now he talks about uncertainty and risk management on the way forward, and he talks about 2% is and will be our inflation target. Just repeating, 2%, yep. Don't forget it. He says real interest rates are now positive. You're kidding. And well above mainstream estimates of the neutral policy rate. He's trying to tell us something.
Yeah.
We cannot identify with certainty the neutral rate of interest, and thus there is always uncertainty about the precise level of monetary policy restraint. Telling us the same story. Complicated by uncertainty about duration of the lags with which monetary tightening he's telling us just how difficult this really is. There may be significant, further drag in the pipeline. Too much could also unnecessarily harm our economy. I wish he listened to himself when he says these things. And so he gets to his conclusion, which is restoring price stability is essential to achieving both sides of our dual mandate. We'll keep up it until the job is done. I only wish he would use the forward-pointing indicators rather than the backward-looking indicators in his targeting. Because I think judging the forward-looking indicators and their likelihood, the likely outcome from them is very important. Yeah. And, I can't stress enough, we should be looking at the reality, where we are. And he says we're at 3.2. No, we're at 2.56. Now, in trueflation, because it is day to day, it's hard to get a secular trend, although this is a secular trend here.
Right.
There was this little bump recently, but I think we're very fast approaching the 2%.
Very fast. And the little bump and even the flattening, this flattening and the little bump there was only three things in that: gasoline, which was oil and gas, housing a tiny bit, but it was only on primary dwellings. I mean, on owned homes. And the third thing was a little bit in food and beverages. And the food and beverages would have been mostly due to the fact that the gasoline price is going up. So you have all three of those now relaxing. So you're going into the off season on housing. You're going into the off season with regard to gasoline, and you're going and the food and beverages already come down. That's the reason the thing is already starting back down again on trueflation, is because food and beverage has already started going back down. So yeah, I think we're headed not only to 2. I think, as I've said over and over again, I think that by the end of the year we could be very close to 0 and maybe even going deflationary because of productivity. Yeah. Because of productivity.
Well, either way, once you start in a direction, it's awfully hard to change direction, which is not what I hear in all of what he says.
Or what the economists are saying.
No. And there's no recognition of, how much momentum there is in an economic cycle. Now, when you think about the impact of deflation globally, I mean, we're seeing deflation right now in China.
Yes.
So that is going to impact us.
Yes.
We haven't priced that in. It's not in these numbers yet.
Oh, not at all.
And so I think that we are in the serious red area, danger area of overshooting.
I agree.
I asked 2 raises ago for a pause. We didn't get it. I thought last time we would sure get a pause. Now, if he doesn't maintain the pause, then I think we'll be in serious trouble.
The market believes that there will be no more increases this year. That's what the market, I think, currently believes. Most of the economists and analysts that I've really been scouring at the last few days, not that I trust any of them, some of them I trust more than others, are all believing at this point no more raises this year. Now, obviously, there can be things that pop up that we're not expecting.
Yeah.
The only thing that we can absolutely know is going to happen is the unexpected. So things can change that would change that. But right now, the sense on the street is no more raises this year, but probably no cuts either. Again, barring some big unexpected thing. I think the big unexpected thing would be a PCE of 2%. In not this one. This one I don't think could be below the core. I'd be thrilled if it's under 3, on the core. I'd be thrilled if it's 3.5 on the core. It was 4.1 last time. So on the core, if it gets down to 3.5, that'd be phenomenal. But I think we could be looking at a 2, maybe by October, November. That would then start to be where they probably would have to think about a cut. So Larry, okay, so the long and short of the situation with the Fed talk was, we think that the market thinks it was neutral. It appears by the end of the day, the market accepted it as being neutral. So now it all comes down to the PCE coming out on Thursday. If the PCE, as mentioned, comes in at least down from last time, I think the next leg of the bull is in place. What do you think?
I almost agree. I think Powell will hold steady. You follow it. So what has gas been doing? What has oil been doing in the last month?
So oil peaked at 84, and now it's back down to 79, 78 and a half. Peaked about 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
And a tremendous amount of oil coming on market. So all 5 of I forget what they call them. Anyway, the Libya, Venezuela, Iraq, Iran.
These are benchmark crudes.
The ones that don't play ball with OPEC because they need the money.
Oh, I see. The independents, yeah.
The independents. And then the United States and Canada, all of those, that's 7 different major suppliers of oil, all increasing supply going into the off season. So that should impact oil. I don't think Saudi is going to be able to drop theirs numbers enough.
But from the Fed's perspective, that's futures. The question is, what was the price ranges in the last PCE period? So that's more important.
Yeah. So again, we've been in a range on oil for months between 68 and 84. And most of the time it's been kind of in the 72, 73 area. So it's almost back to that 72, 73 area. Yeah, I'd say we're still in a good range, but the gasoline prices would normally go up in summer. Again, that should be taken out by seasonality. And then they normally go down in the fall. There was some shortages a couple of weeks ago, but not any longer. So all in all, gasoline prices seem to be going down. Oil prices definitely going down. And housing prices, it's possible they stay up in the winter, but not usually.
Travel has gone down for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I follow that. Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, hopefully it'll be a good number and that will keep things steady. It's possible.
Okay. Larry, thanks as always for coming on the show. And we'll see you, if not before, you'll be back on next Saturday morning, because this is the week when Kathy Wood gives her talk on Friday night. And so I'm sure there's a chance we'll have you on during the week because, well, maybe you're going to be on the road. So that's going to be.
Yes, I'm going to be on the road. So I'll let you know. We may have a conversation while I'm there.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much, Larry.
Take care, Andy.
And for all of you, thanks so much for watching, and it's been great talking to you.
Click the link below to get your paperback, Kindle, or audiobook now.